Welcome everybody and thank you for attending this Cool Women in Science webinar with the occasion of the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. Before we start with our first panel, I want to look to the agenda for today. So we will start with our panel one, which is Insights of Women in the sector, which will be around 40 minutes. After it, we will proceed with a Q&A, 10 minutes where I invite all of you to share your insights and launch questions to our panelists. After that, we will have a 5 minutes break to recharge some energies and to come ready for our second panel, which will be focused on women on EU projects. The structure will be the same. We will have a 10 minutes Q&A, where again, you are more than welcome to participate. And we will finalize our webinar with some closing remarks. I would like to start this webinar by introducing with all my pleasure to Ivana Rogulj, which is the moderator of our first panel. Ivana is a senior energy expert at the European Energy and Climate Policy Foundation. She has over 17 years of experience working on energy efficiency projects and has contributed to more than 30 research, policy development, and educational projects in the energy sector. Her academic background includes degrees in electrical and environmental engineering, along with an MBA in energy economics, and she's currently undertaking a PhD in economics. So, Ivana, the floor is yours, and thank you so much.
Good morning, and thank you, Carmela, and thank you really for organizing this wonderful webinar. Maybe we can call it a panel discussion more than a webinar, and giving this excellent women opportunity to tell us a bit more about themselves and their work in the sector, which is still underrepresented, where women are still underrepresented. I also want to thank the other colleagues from Evolve and CoolLIFE project for thinking about this opportunity for celebration of this International Day of Women and Girls in Science. So maybe I start with the fact that we all know that women are really underrepresented in the topics of heating, cooling, ventilation, but also with the fact that this is a great loss for science, for engineering and development, not even getting into the discussion why, but on the fact that we are relying on the expertise of the part of the population that by the fact is a loss. Also, the important thing that the space cooling is becoming more and more important, science-wise, engineering-wise, research-wise, and so on. So basically, it is one of the fastest growing energy-consuming sectors globally, with the data consumption, also with data centers. And we are coming in the need for more and more sustainable solutions. So this need comes, of course, from the inevitable consequences of climate change, but also from some positive aspects like the needed welfare of the citizens and comforts of the citizens. So there were some important women like Alice Park and Margaret Ingalls that have started and historically paved the way for the women in energy and cooling and heating sector. And I have this great opportunity to present the experts of today. So here with us, I will go alphabetically, the easiest way. So here with us, we have Andrea Voigt, who is the Vice President and Head of Global Public Affairs and Sustainability at Danfoss Climate Solutions. She has a huge CV with very, very, very important roles in the last 20 years in this sector, including membership of leading organizations and huge experience in cooling industry. So it will take a very long time to go through everything. Welcome, Andrea, and thank you for joining. We also have Charlotte Robinson. She's been working in industrial refrigeration for 6 years. And I think the most important thing to emphasize today is that she won the Area Women in Cooling Competition Award. We congratulate you on this award. I think it's great that the award exists and great that it recognizes younger women in engineering. She's currently working in the Catalent Pharma Solutions as the refrigeration engineer. And We also have Delia Villagrasa. She's an economist, an expert in European and international environmental policy, also very huge experience in various roles, leading work with governments, with businesses, philanthropic organizations, as independent consultant, but also the thing I would emphasize really with NGOs, with Can Europe, WWF, and so on. At the moment, she's the director of Cool Heating Coalition with the aim to decarbonize heating and cooling sectors. So welcome. And maybe we already start with the first question, as we don't have a lot of time, and I know you have a lot of things to say. So this question would be for all of you, and maybe we go by the order of introduction. Is this the simplest for now? So could you just share with us what motivated you to start this career, and what are the things that you faced during this career development? I think there is a lot of things we can talk about it as women, but maybe some that you find most important in your career until now. Maybe Andrea, we start with you. Thank you.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. And yes, I can give it a go. And I'm sure that in the discussion afterwards, more ideas will also come to mind. But I do think I'm quite typical actually for the women working in heating and cooling in this industry, because I landed in this industry by total coincidence. So I have a very unusual career path, I would say. I started studying languages, and via my language study, via French actually, I landed in a French company, and in that French company in sales. And then there was just a position open in the sales of heating and cooling related products. And so then I kind of discovered that industry by landing by coincidence in that position. And I stayed there ever since. And what I have to say is that I found it, once I put my foot into this sector, I found it really exciting, because it touches upon so many things in our society, in our daily lives. Because cooling, it's not only, you mentioned space cooling and the growing need for space cooling, you also mentioned data centers, but then there's also the cold chain, obviously, food cold chain, medicine, etc. So heating and cooling is really everywhere in our daily lives. And so I discovered that little by little, and then stayed there. And what I have to say is that when I started, so that seems now a very, very long time ago, but when I started, there were hardly any women in the sector. I still see myself presenting at conference, etc., looking in the audience and seeing an ocean of dark suits and light blue shirts. And now I still see a lot of dark suits and light blue shirts, but I'm seeing also some colored dots in there, which are an increasing number of women. But that being said, still far from being enough. So I think there is a lot more that can be done and can be achieved. But it is, I think what I lived in my early career, and what I saw is very typical for the women in that sector. It's a general, even if I'm moving away from women as such, it's a general problem of the sector in itself, that it's not very well known, and that people very often come to it just by pure coincidence. And of course, that's then amplified by the women factor, where this is even stronger. So I'll leave it there for now, and I'll give the floor to my co-panelists, and I'm sure we'll have also a bit of an exchange around this afterwards.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to reflect a bit. I think we talked off the record, and I mentioned the very interesting graduation photo I have, where I'm the only one with 25 guys. And it's always something I share during the holidays, that are kind of emphasizing this importance of women also being included in sectors like those that are based on engineering, no matter what their background is, that women get to know things very fast and learn very fast. Can we see from Charlotte if things have changed a bit in the meantime? Are things a bit different from your perspective?
For me, I always wanted to go into a career that was engineering based. But I decided to do things a bit differently and start a family first and then train after I'd had my children, so I didn't have to take a career break and come out of it and then go back into it. But unfortunately, I was going to do an internal apprenticeship where I used to work, and they announced that the facility was closing. So partway through my application, I had to stop, and it was then that I decided to look at what other apprenticeships were available to me. And I stumbled across refrigeration, again, like Andrea said, by complete chance. It wasn't even on my radar. And the more I researched it, the more it piqued my interest. There was a broad spectrum of applications that had never occurred to me previously. So yeah, I applied, and here we are today. The only female on my course. Though I think we're a minority, but I do have a very good friend, Chloe, who I met through the Women in Cooling video competition, and we chat now and then and have a catch up. So it's nice to have familiar, friendly faces. But yeah, it's pretty much the same experiences as Andrea.
Delia, does your experience match the other ones? Because mine also does. There is always a bit of this kind of accidental part where you get into the world of energy.
Yes, I think partially yes. The coincidence part Andrea mentioned echoes very strongly with me. I came to the heating and cooling agenda from the environmental point of view. And having studied economics, I did the traditional thing. I went into a company, basically, the normal company work, found it pretty boring, and kind of as a lark applied at WWF International, which is in Switzerland, where I originally come from. To my surprise, they took me. And then, like, a few years later, I was pretty much hooked on environmental issues and very quickly climate issues, because we started working on climate at the time. So we're talking, what was it, 1990, 91, we started working on climate change, which at the time really was not an issue very well known. And from climate change, political issues, you seek quite quickly into energy policy. And the kind of climate and energy policy world, basically, I've been on that now for the past 30 years, but starting also totally by coincidence. I feel a little bit like an imposter here because, I mean, with Charlotte's real science background as an engineer, economics is often seen as a bit of a voodoo science. But that said, when I studied at my university, which was considered a relatively tough one, we were 12.5% girls when I started. It was pretty paradise for partying, I can tell you. But it was, for the actual coursework, it was quite tough. And the attitudes, maybe also particularly because it was Switzerland, were very old-fashioned towards women. So we were not really taken that serious, because everybody assumed you're going to marry anyway. Then basically, why waste the money on our education? But unsurprisingly, most of the women I started with actually persevered, whereas 3/4 of the boys fell out of the courses during the time of the studies. So not quite correct. And I think that when we look at that university now, I hear it's almost half-half starting. So we've seen a huge change in the past 40 years in that respect. And I think that's really positive to have more women in economics. Then maybe also energy economics, which at the time was not an issue, but now really, really is one. So I think that's a positive progressive change. So it has to be maintained, however.
Yeah, so there is some positive results of all the work that has been done through generations, I guess. What I noticed from all three of you and me also is this accidental part, this coincidence part. I think that's very interesting, but it also opens the question of why, and whether this is related to some aspects of early education or education in general. What do you think, or how society looks at these specific works and the specific sectors? What do you think are the root causes for underrepresentation, and what could be done in this specific aspect. I would maybe start with Andrea, if you can give us your opinion.
Yeah, of course. And I think what I'm going to say, it will apply to the women in the sector, but will apply generally to the sector as well, because the two phenomena are really linked to each other, I would say. And there is clearly, you mentioned the early knowledge as well and early education. So I think there is clearly a very strong lack of awareness and of knowledge that this sector actually exists as a sector. So people wouldn't choose it, but they would perhaps just, as we were saying in the beginning, hear about it by coincidence. But it's definitely not known for what it is. And I think there are a lot of things that can probably be done in order to change that. It can also change already very early. It can change at school already. It can change at introductions when you. I'm German originally, so in the last year of your school year in general, you have those information sessions. What can you study afterwards? What are the possibilities? I do not recall having ever heard anything about heating and cooling. And when I look at my children, they certainly also never were told about that. And I think there could be some more early information about the sector, and then also afterwards at the universities themselves, there is a lack of spreading the knowledge as well. It's kind of hidden in mechanical engineering or thermodynamics, or under broader kind of concepts, but not as a sector in itself. So I think there is a lot of communication still necessary, early information already at schools, and then perhaps also how you call it. Just to give one example, which I found really, I thought that's just not possible, but it is. As Danfoss, we are sponsoring a heat pump diploma at Karlsruhe University. And so when discussing alongside with other OEMs, and when discussing with the professors, or what kind of triggered the creation of that diploma, he said, well, we were thinking a long time how we would call it. And so when we called it heat pump diploma, we couldn't attract any interest or any students, or there was just not enough. It wasn't considered attractive enough. So now we call it sustainability something. So so it's about the name tag you give to it, actually, and then it's perceived more interesting or more I don't know, more attractive, and then more people would subscribe to this particular diploma. So it's about how you call it as well. Does it sound attractive to the people who are looking into that education? So yeah, I think a lot, if I summarize what I'm saying, a lot is linked really to adequate communication, how you call the sector, and then raising awareness early already. And I don't think there need to be specific sessions now for women in that sense. I think if we manage to make this more attractive as a sector in the general communication and conveying knowledge about what this sector is doing, this will then by default also attract more women to it. So I wouldn't even make a major difference there. Just treat everyone equally, obviously, and do so early enough already. And then I think things will change. But clearly, communication, awareness raising, early information campaigns, that's the things, I guess, that we need to get much, much better at.
Maybe just an additional question for Delia, which is kind of a follow-up on this one. So basically, I am with Andrea. There are some, let's say, sectors or jobs which are not attractive only because they are communicated differently or not communicated enough. However, there still is the gap between men and women in these sectors. Is it also because of the way it's communicated, or it's attached to other courses or other sectors which are also more communicated to men? Or do you find any additional reasons why there is this gap still ongoing, although, as you mentioned, things are getting better with time.
Yeah, well, I think the communication is part of it, but it starts even earlier, I would say. Go into a toy section in any shop, basically, and then look at the toys marketed to girls. Specifically, it's all the pink, fluffy, dolly stuff. And then look at the stuff marketed to boys. It's the machinery, it's the Lego, it's the cars. So your kind of differentiation as to interesting technical issues already starts that early. So if you want to have more girls in the science techie fields, it needs to start with moms and dads giving the right toys to their girls too, or encouraging to put them to play with those. I think it really does start that early. And then, yes, the communication part is part of it. I see a lot of young women really interested in the sustainability areas, in the environmental areas. But quite a few don't realize that heating and cooling is almost half of energy use. So the way whether we use renewables or coal or biomass, really that makes a huge difference to the environment. Making those links also could also help bring more girls into the field. In schools, I have two daughters, both of them in their early 20s. Environmental issues or energy issues were not touched upon. Okay, I'm talking Belgium, a relatively old-fashioned school, but still, I was surprised. So I felt, why not? Yeah. So that, I think, is also something which needs to change to get more girls into this field. But the other part, I think, is us who are in that field talking about it and making sure people know, yeah, you can succeed as a woman in this field. Okay, you may have to work a bit harder than your male counterparts, as usual, but you can succeed. And that, I think, is a very important message to give.
Well, agree.
Yeah, that is the answer I was hoping for. That the start is already kind of not going in the right direction from the early ages where the toys are involved, and then continues maybe later on, even more and more kind of dividing between what are the interests of girls and boys, and later on women and men. So maybe, Charlotte, you can give us a bit of, since you have the newest view on the educational system. What are your views on what are the changes? Do you see something happening now that's better from what we are talking about?
Things are getting better, but it's a very slow process. So initially, when I was 16, I left school in 2006, and I wasn't encouraged to pursue an engineering career. I sort of rocked up to the college with an idea of what I wanted to do, and came away with leaflets about teaching and sports, and I just went away feeling a bit like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this then. I felt very not encouraged, basically. And I feel like not having any sort of representation at a young age is very detrimental to the industry. So you can't be what you can't see. So things like this webinar and the Women in Cooling video, it females putting themselves out there to say, actually, you can excel in any career that you want to take part in, even as a minority. And just a bit of confidence given to the younger generation to say, yes, you can do this, and this is an option available to you. My apprenticeship is not offered in a lot of colleges. There's not a lot of colleges that do the courses. So that's obviously an issue as well. And it's just awareness. I know Alex, I think her name is Alex Knight, has sort of started this amazing thing where people like us can go into primary schools and give a couple of lessons, science-based lessons, to really show that actually young girls can be involved in engineering, and it's not an abnormal thing. It's something that should be embraced and accepted by everyone, which I think is really great, and something that I'd love to be on board with. So yeah, there's plenty that can be done, and there are things that are being done, but it's slow, but it's heading in the right direction.
Yeah, we came to the work, like after finishing school and everything, you come to work, and then there is always this question that's asked to women: how do you combine things? How do you survive with family and everything? And I will repeat something that's said hundreds of times, like this is a question that's usually asked to women. But I think it's important to everyone, no matter what are their circumstances, you always have something in your private life happening. What do you think, if there are some specific policies or specific, let's say, work circumstances that help you to kind of thrive, related to combining with your private life, no matter what the circumstances are, or there was some work-related help, like mentorship programs advancing you in your work and so on? Is that something you kind of encountered, or something that you used, or something that made sense in your career until now? Maybe we ask all three of you, because I think it's a very important question. And if we start here, Andrea, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I think, first of all, I'm married to a Frenchman, and so when my children were born, we were living in France at that time. And I think it starts there, or at least the foundation for what I did afterwards as well was partly laid there, because France has an excellent infrastructure if you are a working mom. It is kind of normal in society that women are working. And the infrastructure is there. You have creche, you have nannies, and I mean there are different ways on how you can do that. And most importantly, you're not being looked upon as or back at that time, you are not being looked upon like a bad mom because you continue working while you're having your children and while they are still very young. It's just normal. It's part of society. Whereas at that time, I had a lot of friends in Germany who also had their children at the same moment, but living in Germany, and Germany at that time, and still today, by the way, doesn't have that infrastructure. And so that kind of colors society as well. And I know that even very close friends of mine were looking at me totally like, what? Your daughter is only 6 months old and you start working again? How can you do that? And how can you entrust her to a creche, to a structure? Don't you feel bad about that? So I think it starts there. It starts with the infrastructure in place that gives you the opportunities. And then I think in the meantime, things have evolved, obviously, have also evolved in Germany, although I still think it's really far from being glorious in Germany. And then you have, of course, also the companies. What are companies doing to help you and to support you in that development? And I can say for my company today, for Danfoss, what I'm seeing, I find that hugely encouraging, really. I don't need it anymore because my children are old enough now, but when I'm seeing the opportunities that are given to young women when they have their children, like flexibility and working times, and also understanding also if something happens that you may need to stay at home and just look after your child and nobody looks at you in a funny way. I think those things, that is very basic things, but they make life much easier. And also then, of course, Danfoss is a Nordic company, so in the Nordic kind of environment, you even have a more open mentality, and it's also more there's more balance between men and women as well, because you would have men going on paternity leave. Totally normal. Nobody would wonder or be surprised or anything. It's just part of daily life, really. So it's that infrastructure. It's how companies are evolving and the opportunities that they are giving their employees, and then also still staying with the Danfoss example, also having targets in place. Like we have, for example, ambitious leadership target where 30% there should be 30% of women in leadership positions, and then also having diversity targets in leading positions, to really have this anchored in the KPIs of the company and of the leadership teams, of the management teams who who then look for candidates for the position. So job rotation is another example where you really also help women to discover different jobs in the company, moving from one to another, employee resource group. So there are a lot of different structures in place that really support women in their career, both from a family perspective and infrastructure perspective, and then from a career development perspective. So I think those things are really very important. And as far as I'm personally concerned, I mean, that was another time still, when my children were small. And what I did back then, because I in the company that I was working back then, I didn't see those opportunities. I actually left my employer back then, and I set up a freelance business where I had the flexibility that I needed with my children, and that worked for me personally. That worked out very well. I mean, I had that infrastructure in place, as I was saying, because it was just the case in France back then, and then I could develop my own little business, which I did for a good 10 years while the children were younger, and then I stepped back into the corporate world. But yeah, I think it's a mix of society, infrastructure in society, mindset of the people, and then in the companies providing the opportunities for development and the flexibility needed as well. Mindset and is really an important factor there. But things have changed in the meantime. I mean, Charlotte is much younger, so I hope she will say no. that things are easier today, hopefully. So
I think we're also dealing with the new generation. Luckily, because I see that the influence of the newer generation is also positive towards us. I'm also seeing some things which I was not even I was afraid to ask. Like, I wasn't not sure if that is something that's possible, which luckily is now becoming possible. And luckily, the new generation is expecting a bit more for their life from all these aspects of kind of balance, let's call it like that, because it is never balanced, but it's what is used as a saying. Can you comment on that then, Charlotte, on what is your perspective if things have changed in that area as well?
I think it's probably dependent on your employer and what they're like. Personally, for me, I couldn't do my job without a degree of flexibility. I've got school runs and pickups and half terms and doctor's appointments, and the children are ill sometimes, or they might have their nativity play or their sports day and parents' evening. So for me, it's what a company will put in to invest into their employees as to what you get back out. So I try my best every day, and there is a degree of flexibility where if I need to do a drop off or a pickup, I can do that, and that seems to work for both people. Otherwise, it's just if it's too regimented and rigid, there's so many restrictions. It just makes trying to get women, especially, into the industry really a really hard task. Like, to have 6 weeks of summer holidays, essentially, that you've got to worry about. And I'm sure if you add up all the days that children have off of school, and how many days leave you get, there is a big difference. You're sort of begging and borrowing days because your days off don't equate to your children's days off. So yeah, I think it's definitely improved. Like, I feel like I can come to work and do my job, and I get treated exactly the same as everyone else, and I can do the best job that I can do, essentially.
Yeah, that kind of seems logical when you think about it. Like, why would you want a nervous employee that has a sick child at home? But some logical things are always broken by the fact that, oh, someone else might do it, but not as
Yeah,
you.
and of course you get work from home now. That isn't an option for me because I'm on equipment, fixing equipment that's here, so I can't really work from home. But I know there are plenty of people that have the opportunity to do that, and it just makes life so much easier. Just even a 50-50 split, so you can do 2 or 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. It makes the world of difference, especially with childcare costs as well.
For me, it's a big difference. For example, we have this 100% work from home policy, which has maybe from the perspective of someone who doesn't have a lot of obligations is a bit depressing if you're from home nonstop. So you have this option to go to a co-working space and similar. But for me, the possibility to kind of, as you said, respond to the needs at the time when the needs are happening. I think the employer gets a bit more also from you, because you feel this responsibility that you have to kind of return this effort of leaving your space to kind of care about all the other aspects of life. I don't know, Delia, what is your impression on the topic?
Yeah, things have, I do think, changed attitude-wise. What Andrea described in my background, Switzerland. I also had some friends asking me why I continued working when I had kids. They didn't stay friends because I felt it was quite outrageous. Yeah. So, but I think attitudes have changed. Indeed, that's a first prerequisite for women being able to successfully pursue a career. That said, if I look at the internet, there's a backlash at the moment. You see all those wifey staying at home with doing the milk and then whatever, the omelette themselves from scratch. Yeah, so stuff like that. Basically, the woman's place is at home, that kind of trend. I see that as a real danger to the movement of getting more women, in tech jobs, but also leadership positions overall. But overall, I think for women, we have more self-assurance than we used to have. We feel more apt doing jobs, even if we have children. But I think if I look at myself 30 years ago when I still did not have children, what I would tell myself now from my perspective today is try to plan it. So try to plan having a crash the moment you know you're pregnant so that you organize yourself, try to see what type of support network you can build up. So we found people to take care of the kids, for instance, when I had to go traveling and my hubby was also not at home, for instance. So try to build up a support network which helps you. And I mentioned hubbies because Charlotte said she brings the kids to the doctor. She gets them from school. Hubby should also do that. Be very careful in your choice of a husband. I know this goes well beyond the kind of realm of work, but if you have a partner who helps with the taking care of his children, that's going to make your life so much easier. So be very careful in whom you choose, so that that chap takes care of his kids as well as you do. And if that is more equal, that role kind of distribution, I think then the women's chances of pursuing jobs, wherever actually, not just in the energy tech field, are much, much higher. And that is really a prerequisite. And I happily see with the younger generation, there seems to be a change too with the men. They like more to take care of the kids than maybe the men in my generation did. So I think that's really a very important point. Choose wisely, choose a good guy, and that will really help you, not just with the kids, but for your career.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Also, I think it's very important that you kind of think of your life a bit like what and who can help. And this is something that women do not do very well. It's not only like the organizational, but like if there is someone else who can help me with whatever aspect of life, including career, and by that I mean fair help with the career. And this is maybe a good advice. You already started the advice round, and our last round before the question is the advice round, and you started with the advice round to the younger women in the sector. Do you want to add something, Delia? And then we pass to the others also, giving some advice to the ones that are starting the career in cooling, heating, or any other, because we are kind of, we follow the whole aspect of women working.
We branched out a bit, haven't we?
Yeah.
I think
That's a
know
good
what you
thing.
want, go for it. Don't hide your light under a bushel. And I would like to add a little anecdote. When I was a kid in school, I have a little prop here. We did these little albums. It's possible to see? Yeah. So your friends and your teachers wrote in that little album little memories. Well, very cute. My math teacher, so my prime kind of influencer, if you want it, on my science work. What did he write in there? He wrote, and I'm quoting because I looked it up. He said, where did I write it down? I can't find it, so I have to do it by memory. The intelligence of a smart woman shows itself by that woman not showing her intelligence. Let that sink in. So basically, my math teacher told me, don't shine too much because the boys are going to be scared. Translation, right? So that was in the late 70s. And I think some of that has changed, but not that much in quite a few boardrooms or meeting rooms. If the woman says something, she may not be listened to, and the guy might repeat the same thing a bit later and be listened to. So it's important that women stand up for themselves, say their opinion, say it nicely but strongly, be heard. I think that's a really important kind of recommendation I would give. Stand up for yourself. You will not always be liked. And that's another issue which women face. You're supposed to be nice. You're supposed to be liked. Well, you will not make a career of being nice all the time. Sad to say, but. So stand up for yourself and go for what you want and what you know you can do. So I think that would be probably one of my most important recommendations to any young women. We tend to undersell ourselves. I'm at the moment recruiting a new person for my team. If I look at the interviews, and we ask a lot of questions and we ask everybody the same questions, the women tend to say, yeah, I think I can do whenever I ask a question, I think I can do that, but I'm not sure because I've not done it before. The boys will all say, of course I can do that. So the attitude is the women undersell themselves, the boys oversell themselves. So I'm not saying the women should oversell themselves, but be confident of what you can do, what you have learned, what your experience is. Don't undersell yourself. So that would be a few tips, basically, from a position of someone who employs people.
Thank you. Maybe just a bit of anecdote also. So my ex-colleague and me a few years ago, suffering from the same illness of not saying what we mean at the meetings and so on, did a little research, like a few months we were following the fact that, and this was based on a book we read, it was not like we had an invention, an idea of where women are sitting in the large meetings, because we were representatives in many working groups in ministries and so on. So we saw that women are always sitting in the back, or if you have a round table and there is a second row of chairs which are for people who are writing the minutes and so on, then women who have a role in the meeting are also sitting there, and it's always like this. And then I tend to speak to my younger colleagues now and say, this is a very important thing I noticed, just please speak. Because even sometimes if I take too much floor, that's a kind of a recuperation from the long-term illness of not saying enough. So I think that's a very important point. Andrea, do you want to add something to that also?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But a lot of what Delia said resonates very well with what I lived myself and what I'm seeing as well. And I would add a few things to that, perhaps. One very strong advice, and that's based on my own career when I was young, but it's also based very much on what I'm seeing now in the company with young women. Do not aim for perfection. I think that is a big showstopper, really, and that's something what women tend to do for all the reasons that Delia already described. This I don't know, this kind of feeling nearly obliged to be perfect in what you're doing, and because you want to be so perfect, you don't do it in the end, because you think, oh well, nah, I'm not going to be 100%. I'm only going to be like 80%, or I better don't do it. So this, I think, this is something which is very typically female, and is something where we put ourselves stumbling blocks in our paths. So that would be a very strong advice. Then on the underselling part, I 100% agree on that one as well, and I'm seeing it. I saw it not so long ago. Also in my teams in the company, you would have a young man coming there and saying, "Oh yes, but I see myself not in that position. I see myself in a more senior position," not even specifically explaining why. Just, I have the experience, I should be at that place, and that's it. And then you would never, in the teams, I would not have a single woman come with that same kind of attitude. Yeah, well, I see myself, my career path is this, and then I want to be a senior, whatever. It's this conviction, and it's linked to the perfection thing, I think, to really stand up for what you would like to achieve and where you see yourself. But then also being realistic about it as well. It's a mix of also having the right appreciation of yourself. What is it that you want to achieve, and then stand in for what you want to achieve, and not be shy and not be too modest, but also not overstate it. Just be true to yourself as well. I think that's another important advice I would give. And the third one is also to live ourselves, to give a good example. So just a very pragmatic example. If you organize, for example, a conference or something, and you look for speakers, and that's a very basic thing, don't just go for the men, because it's still much easier to find male speakers than female speakers. There are more, so of course you find more easily. But in this industry, coming back to heating and cooling, I'm always forcing myself to think, okay, no, I don't want a panel, I want a mixed panel. So let's think, who are the women I can get into that panel. So really also force ourselves to apply what we are preaching, and to apply it ourselves, and not go for the easy solution. So yeah, being a good role model, I think, at the point where I'm at my age now, and at the point of my career, that's something I would like to do more, also to be a good role model, and to also show what can be done and what should be done.
Thank you. Maybe Charlotte, a few words from you, and then we have a few questions that's coming from the audience that I want to share with you.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Andrea said, is to not be afraid to put yourself out there, and have the confidence to push yourself outside your comfort zone, because it's always better to try something and be uncertain whether it's going to work out, than regret never trying it at all.
Yeah.
And just waste away large portions of your life thinking, oh, I wish I'd done this, I wish I'd done that. And there will be plenty of support on your journey, but to remember to not expect that encouragement, and to have the drive from your own determination that you can actually do this by yourself. Obviously the support is really great, but we know that not everyone's privileged enough to have a good support network. So yeah, it's just the self determination to know that when you put your mind to it, you can excel at whatever you're trying, and just to not be afraid to put yourself out there, essentially. And that goes hand in hand with what you were saying, Andrea, of the whole perfectionism. And I'm quite guilty of that myself. If I'm not going to be very good at it, it really puts me off trying in the first place, because it's almost a fear of failure. Because as a female, you feel like you've got something to prove. You've got to go that extra mile to prove yourself. And you don't always have to do that. I walk around feeling like I've got a lot to prove, but actually just turning up and being yourself is more than enough. And the effort you put in is more than enough. And to know that, to not undersell yourself, like your skills and your knowledge is very valid, and is on par with any other person that you're working with. That's it, essentially.
Okay, we have some questions, and two of them are rather similar, and I'll pass them to Andrea because they are asking what are the key initiatives that companies can do to attract more women and to also make a more supportive and inclusive environment for women in this industry. You mentioned some during your conversation about the circumstances in Danfoss, but maybe you can emphasize the most important ones.
Yeah, I think first of all, I think to have a clear policy in place for companies with clear targets as well. I think that so that it is on everybody's radar. And I was saying Danfoss, for example, has this 30% women in leadership target, which is also part of the KPIs and diversity in the management teams, etc. So I think having clear targets is important to just keep the radar on the right in the right direction of the company. And then more specifically, I think in Danfoss there are a lot of very good programs to support women in their career as well. And those programs go from self-learning. There are a lot of modules that you can take as a woman if you want to learn in specific aspects. Then also I think the mentorship programs can be a really good support. And the way how this works in Danfoss, for example, is there are different types of mentorship programs. So you can, as an employee, register yourself to be a mentor, and then people in the company, and that's valid not only for women, obviously, that's throughout, can look for what type of mentor they are looking for and who corresponds best to what your needs are. So this is a very basic mentorship program. Then we have also a mentorship program with top management, which is specifically geared towards women, which is I think it's yearly rotating. So you would always have a pool of women who is then in direct contact with our CEO in dedicated sessions, mentoring of what can be done, of how to build your career, etc. So that's, I think, a very, very good initiative. Then we have and maybe a third example, and there are many more, but just to give one third example, are the employee resource groups. There is one for women, and we have sessions like we are having here today. For example, I gave one half a year ago, where you would just talk about your own career, what were the difficulties that you encountered, you give advice to young women listening to you, and you have this exchange where you can then say, okay, reach out to me if you have a problem or if you encounter any difficult situation or whatever, you have a good idea, if you need help. There is really this very open exchange, and I think this openness also to exchange with your fellow workers or colleagues, just not hierarchically at all, but just across the organization. That's super helpful, I would say. And then all the logistical stuff I was mentioning earlier, like the flexibility, working hours, and all of this, of course, it's super important as well. But I think companies, corporates can play a big role in making this change, and the mindset there can be so encouraging and shaping for the career paths of young women, definitely. Yeah. So those are the things that come to my mind immediately.
Okay, thank you. We had one question on communication, which I'm going to skip because we mentioned a lot of communication towards younger people, women, but also men, but also communication of the strategic communication of the topic of heating and cooling, but also of the involvement of women in the topic. I have only one last question from the audience, and that's for you, Charlotte. Is there someone, and I think you mentioned some names already, who you consider a role model in the industry, who you think should be emphasized?
Just there's a couple of women that I know of that are in refrigeration, like Chloe. And she does quite a lot to put herself out there and advocate for other women in the industry. But it's not just female role models as well. There's plenty of other males in the industry that advocate for us and do lots of work. And like my mentor here has always been just treated me as an equal, had high expectations for me that we do things the right way and properly, but has been totally supportive. And I probably wouldn't have gotten through my college in the way I did without his support. So it's not always women supporting women as well. It's having strong male role models that also advocate for women as well, to say, like, equality and diversity and inclusion. And I think that's very important as well, that we've all got each other's backs, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely.
That brings us back to the first thing I think I said, because it's a loss for everyone if not everyone is involved in specific industries and you're not using the most of it, what you can from the brains of all people. So that, I think, is also a kind of a motivation for men to support women in work beyond other motivations that they should have as human beings. So I want to conclude it a bit, what we said today, before I thank you. So basically, we touched upon the fact that the division between men and women and choice of career starts very early with the choice that we are choosing, with the early education and so on. So it can be late. So we need to start with the way we are behaving towards kids. And then we need to communicate the topics that we are working on during all the education. So saying to people that there is a possibility to work in this sector that's very interesting for everyone, especially for women. Then also we need to, as someone who is working in the sector, represent ourselves towards younger women, towards younger people, showing that there is a possibility to succeed and to do something that's very in your heart, and then you can maybe change career and get into heating and cooling or industry and find it interesting to you. And there is also a message to companies that flexibility, that the companies' policies are very helpful and beneficial for the final goals of the company also. And again, something we are mentioning a lot, that the infrastructure, that the policies are the ones that are also leading women towards work and then towards the work they want to be in. And the last but not the least, that's ourselves, like the changes in how we see ourselves, the behavior in the meetings, in the conversations with colleagues, in the conversations where we want to get a job, interviews and so on, to kind of speak up, to say what we think. But else, of course, in the kind of borders of being polite and working with our colleagues in a way that we take into consideration everyone's opinion. So thank you very much. This was one of the nicest conversations I had in my professional life. And I thank you also, Carmela, for the idea and the fact that you kind of gathered us to speak about the topic.
Can I add one little point to the last question you raised? Because we had great answers already from Charlotte and Andrea. One other recommendation would be create the peer-to-peer networks. It's not just the mentoring, but also the peer-to-peer networks. We have the district heating divas, for instance, which I think is a really nice invention, where women who work in that particular field, and they made it a bit wider, so generally in heating and cooling, meet up, and there may be a member of the parliament there also to give a little speech, etc. So these peer-to-peer networks, I think, are also very important to advance the women in the field. And for recruiting, I mean, that was already known when I was at uni. The people who recruit tend to take younger versions of themselves. So if a man recruits, it's not going to be a conscious bias, it's an unconscious thing. He will tend to recruit a young man. He sees himself in that youngster. So getting more women into the position of actually recruiting will also help and advance us. And I also would like to say a quick thank you. It was really fascinating to hear the experiences and see the questions. And the one by Archer, sadly, we have not replied to. So if anybody has experience on her question, maybe that's something we could still do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, big thank you.
So thank you, girls, for this insightful conversation. I think we can think a lot about all the things mentioned. So I hope the attendees are ready for our next panel, We are gonna stop for 5 minutes to recharge some energies. I hope that the panels of panel 1 can still stay with us to look at our second panel. So thank you so much. We will be back in 5 minutes.